On the morning of March 17, 1934, nearly 50 people stood inside the Monroe County Courthouse in Clarendon, Arkansas, waiting for the county clerk to auction off a piece of land nobody wanted. The property was listed as Parcel 118, 37 acres of flooded timber, black mud, mosquitoes, and stagnant water along the edge of Cypress Creek. The county had tried to sell it 3 times. No farmer wanted it, no timber company wanted it, even the bank had refused to take it as collateral. When the clerk opened the bidding at $10, the room went silent. Then a thin widow in a faded blue dress raised her hand. $12, she said. For half a second, nobody reacted. Then the laughter started. A cattle farmer named Vernon Pike slapped his hat against his knee. $12 for a mosquito nursery, he shouted. Martha, you could bought 2 good shovels with that money. Someone in the back called the land a bottomless mud hole. Another man asked whether she planned to grow catfish or fever. Even the banker smiled when he handed her the deed. But Martha Bell did not argue. She did not explain herself. She folded the deed, placed it inside her late husband's tobacco tin, and walked home through the rain. For the next 7 months, the whole town watched the widow disappear into that swamp with a shovel, a battered frying pan, and a hand-drawn map nobody else had seen. Then, on an October morning, Martha walked into Pike's General Store with mud to her knees. She opened her hand. Resting in her palm was a yellow stone about the size of a pecan. By noon, nobody in Clarendon was laughing, because what Martha had pulled from the swamp was only the first gold nugget, and the reason she knew where to look had been hidden inside her husband's Bible for 16 years. In 1934, Clarendon was the kind of Arkansas town where news traveled faster than the mail. Farmers exchanged crop prices outside the feed store. Children carried gossip home from school. Bankers knew which families were behind on their notes before those families admitted it to themselves. The Great Depression had already taken a heavy toll on Monroe County. Cotton prices had collapsed. Farm auctions had become common. Families who had worked the same soil for generations were packing their belongings into wagons and leaving for Memphis, Little Rock, or wherever someone claimed there might be work. Martha Bell knew that fear better than most. She was 39 years old and had been a widow for 11 months. Her husband, Thomas Bell, had died after a winter fever settled into his lungs. He left Martha with a 14-year-old son named Eli, a 9-year-old daughter named Ruth, 3 milk cows, 6 chickens, and a small rented house on the edge of town. He also left behind 1840s in cash. That was everything. Thomas had never owned a farm. He had spent most of his adult life repairing river pumps, sharpening saw blades, and guiding timber crews through the wetlands along Cypress Creek. He knew the backwaters better than any surveyor in the county, but knowing land and owning land were 2 very different things. After Thomas died, neighbors assumed Martha would leave. A widow without acreage, machinery, or family money did not have many choices in 1934. The banker, Charles Whitmore, suggested that she move in with relatives in Tennessee. Vernon Pike offered to buy her cows for half their value. Even the church ladies quietly discussed which family might take in Ruth if Martha could no longer feed both children. Martha listened to all of them. Then she stayed. She took in laundry. She canned vegetables for neighbors. She repaired work shirts by kerosene lamp. And every Sunday night, after the children went to sleep, she opened Thomas's old Bible. Not because she was searching for comfort, because Thomas had hidden something inside it. Between the book of Joshua and the book of Judges was a folded sheet of yellowed paper. It was not a legal survey. It was not a deed. It was a rough map of Cypress Creek, drawn in Thomas's hand. Near the southern edge of Parcel 118, he had marked a narrow bend in the water with a small black cross. Beside it, he had written 4 words, Old Channel, Heavy Yellow Sand. Martha had asked Timmons about the map once, 16 years earlier. Thomas had been repairing a sluice pump for an elderly timberman named Amos Greeley. Greeley had spent his youth working placer deposits in Georgia before moving west. One afternoon, after a flood tore open part of the creek bank, Greeley found flakes of gold trapped in the black sand. Not enough to start a mine, not enough to attract a company, but enough to remember. Thomas and Greeley tested the mud in several places. Most of it held nothing. But one abandoned creek channel contained a band of dense gravel beneath 6 feet of silt. Greeley believed the gold had been carried there long before the creek changed course. Then the floodwater returned. The channel disappeared under mud and cypress roots. Greeley died the following spring. Thomas never had the money to buy the land, but he kept the map. And before his death, he told Martha something she had never forgotten. People look at a swamp and see what's on top, he said. The ground remembers what ran through it before. Parcel 118 came up for auction because its former owner had stopped paying county taxes. The official description was not encouraging. 37 acres, seasonally flooded, no road access, no cleared ground, no assessed agricultural value. The county placed the minimum bid at $10 simply to recover filing costs. Martha arrived at the courthouse carrying exactly $12 in a cloth purse. It was most of the cash she had left. Her son Eli begged her not to do it. $12 is flour for half the winter, he said. Martha understood. She also understood that nobody else in town had seen Thomas's map. When she raised her hand, the laughter was not entirely cruel. Some people felt sorry for her. Others believed grief had damaged her judgment. But Vernon Pike had no such sympathy. Pike owned almost 600 acres of cotton and pasture north of town. He enjoyed being the loudest man in any room. He leaned across the aisle and said, "Martha, a woman alone has enough trouble without buying land that can drown her." The county clerk looked at Martha. "Do you understand the condition of the property?" "Yes, sir. There is no guarantee of access." "I understand." "It floods." "I know. You still bid $12? Martha looked at the deed lying on the clerk's table. "Yes, sir." Nobody bid 13. The hammer fell. Parcel 118 belonged to Martha Bell. The entire transaction took less than 4 minutes. The story lasted for months. At the feed store, men called it Widow Bell's Ocean. Children dared one another to step onto her land without sinking. Pike told customers she had purchased the county's most expensive mosquito, but Martha never defended the decision. Each morning, after milking the cows, she packed cornbread, a jar of water, Thomas's map, and an old iron frying pan. Then she walked 3 miles to the swamp. At first, she did not dig. She observed. She studied where flood debris collected. She watched how the creek moved after rain. She pushed a sharpened iron rod into the ground and recorded the depth where soft mud changed to gravel. She tied strips of white cloth to cypress branches. At night, she redrew Thomas's map and compared it with her own measurements. Eli accompanied her reluctantly. He hated the jokes at school. Other boys asked whether his mother had found any buried pirate ships, but he also knew his mother rarely acted without reason. One afternoon, Martha drove the iron rod into a shallow rise beneath the water. At 5 feet, it passed through soft mud. At 6 feet, the sound changed. The rod scraped against something coarse, gravel. Martha looked at the old map. The Black Cross was less than 20 yards away. Digging through 6 feet of swamp mud with hand tools was almost impossible. Every hole filled with water. The sides collapsed. Roots caught the shovel. Mosquitoes covered their necks and hands. Martha needed a way to reach the gravel layer without excavating the entire bank. Thomas's old tools included a narrow steel pipe, a hand auger, and a homemade sampling tube used by timber crews to test soil near pump foundations. Martha cleaned the tube and attached it to the auger. She and Eli twisted it into the mud. 3 feet, 4 feet, 5 at 6 feet. The auger struck gravel. When they pulled the tube back up, its lower section contained black sand, tiny stones, and reddish clay. Martha carried the sample to the creek. She placed it in the frying pan. Eli watched as she submerged the pan and moved it in slow circles. The lighter clay washed over the edge, then the pale sand, then the smaller stones. At the bottom remained a narrow streak of black material, and inside that black sand something flashed. Eli leaned closer. "What is it?" Martha tilted the pan toward the sun. A speck of yellow clung to the iron. It was smaller than a grain of rice. It could have been mica. It could have been brass. It could have been nothing. Martha touched it with the tip of Thomas's pocket knife. The speck bent. Mica would have broken. Gold bends. She stared at it for a long time. Then she folded the tiny flake inside a scrap of paper and put it in the tobacco tin with the deed. She did not tell anyone. One flake was not proof. It was only permission to keep working. Over the next 6 weeks, Martha and Eli collected 23 samples. Most contained nothing. 5 held fine color. 3 held multiple flakes. The richest samples came from a narrow gravel band running beneath the southern bend of the swamp. Thomas's map had been right, but there was still a problem. Fine flakes would not save the Bell family. Martha needed to reach the heavier gravel trapped beneath the old creek channel, and doing that required more than a frying pan. Martha went to the scrapyard behind Harlan's sawmill and asked the owner whether she could take discarded lumber. Harlan gave her warped boards, a broken wash trough, and several pieces of rusted screen. At home, she and Eli built a crude sluice box based on a sketch in Thomas's notebook. It was 8 feet long. The bottom contained wooden ridges covered with burlap. Water would carry light sand through the box, while heavier black sand and gold settled behind the ridges. They dragged the sluice into the swamp on a wooden sled. For water pressure, Martha repaired one of Thomas's small hand pumps. The contraption looked ridiculous. Even Eli admitted it. A crooked wooden trough sat between 2 cypress trees. A patched hose ran into the creek. Buckets, shovels, screens, and pans lay scattered across the mud. When Vernon Pike discovered what she was building, he brought two neighbors to see it. He stood on the dry edge of the property while Martha worked knee-deep in water. "What is that supposed to be?" Pike asked. "A sluice." "For what?" Martha continued tightening a bolt. Pike looked at the men beside him. "She thinks she found gold." The men laughed. By the following afternoon, the whole town knew. The jokes became worse. Someone left a painted sign beside the road. "Bell Gold Mine. Watch for alligators." Children brought worthless yellow stones to Ruth at school. A merchant offered Martha a gold-painted tin coin in exchange for the mineral rights. Banker Whitmore visited the swamp wearing polished shoes and tried to persuade her to stop. "Martha, people are concerned." "About what?" "That grief has led you into something unwise." "I bought the land with my own money." "Yes, but you have children." "That is why I'm working." Whitmore lowered his voice. "If you need help, the church can arrange something." Martha looked at him. "I don't need charity, Mr. Whitmore. I need dry lumber and 2 feet of pipe." The banker left without answering. Martha went back to the pump. She had learned something important from Thomas. A person could waste half a life explaining work to people who had already decided it was foolish. Better to finish the work. By late September, the sluice was operating. Martha shoveled gravel into the upper box. Eli pumped water. The flow carried mud through the wooden channel, leaving dense material trapped behind the ridges. At the end of each day, they cleaned the burlap and panned the concentrate. They found flakes, dozens of them, but still nothing large enough to prove what lay beneath the swamp. Then, on October 3, a storm dropped nearly 7 inches of rain over Monroe County. Cypress Creek overflowed. The swamp rose 4 feet in one night. Martha's sluice box broke loose and disappeared downstream. 2 weeks of collected gravel washed away. When she arrived the next morning, the southern bank had collapsed. Eli stared at the destruction. "We lost everything." Martha said nothing. She walked to where the bank had fallen. The flood had cut a fresh channel through the mud. A layer of gravel was exposed beneath the roots of an old cypress. Martha knelt. The water had done in one night what she and Eli could not have done in a month. It had opened the old creek bed. They returned with shovels and collected several buckets of newly exposed gravel. The material was darker and heavier than anything they had tested before. Near sunset, Martha washed the first pan. Fine gold appeared along the edge. The second pan held more. The third contained a flattened yellow piece the size of a corn kernel. Eli shouted. Martha held it under the water. It did not sparkle like fool's gold, it glowed. The fourth pan produced nothing. The fifth produced another small piece. Then, from a pocket of gravel wedged beneath a cypress root, Martha removed a rounded nugget, roughly the size of a pecan. It weighed a little over half an ounce. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. Martha rubbed the mud away with her thumb. Thomas had been dead nearly a year. But standing in the flooded swamp, holding the nugget he had spent 16 years remembering, Martha felt as though he had finally finished a sentence. Eli wanted to hide the discovery. Martha agreed that they should not announce everything, but they needed to know whether the nugget was genuine. So the next morning, she placed it in her pocket and walked into town. Pike's General Store was crowded when Martha entered. Farmers were discussing cotton prices around the stove. Banker Whitmore stood near the counter. Vernon Pike was opening a sack of coffee. Martha's dress was stained with mud. Her boots left dark prints across the floor. Pike looked up and grinned. "Morning, Mrs. Bell. Strike it rich?" A few men laughed. Martha approached the counter. "I need Mr. Jacobson to look at something." Samuel Jacobson repaired watches and jewelry from a small workbench near the store's rear window. He was 71 years old and had spent part of his youth working in a Colorado assay office. Martha opened her hand. The room changed. The nugget sat in her palm, dull yellow beneath a streak of black sand. Jacobson adjusted his spectacles. "Where did you get that?" "My land." Pike walked closer. "That could be brass." Jacobson took the nugget and examined it with a loupe. He scratched it against a testing stone. He applied a drop of acid. The mark remained. Then he placed it on a small scale. 8 pennyweights, he said. Nobody spoke. Pike forced a laugh. 8 pennyweights of what? Jacobson looked at him. Gold. The words seemed to empty the room of air. Whitmore stepped forward. "Are you certain?" "I've tested gold since before you opened your bank." Martha looked at the nugget. "What is it worth?" Jacobson calculated silently. At today's government price, a little over $14. The entire town had laughed when Martha paid $12 for the swamp. The first nugget alone was worth more than the land. But that was not what silenced them. The nugget proved the map was real, and if one piece had survived in the old creek gravel, there could be more. Pike's smile disappeared. Whitmore stared at Martha as though she had become a different person while standing in front of him. She had not. She was the same widow who had walked into the courthouse with $12. The only thing that had changed was what the town could see in her hand. By sundown, wagons began appearing near parcel 118. Men who had never set foot in the swamp now walked along its boundary. Some carried shovels. Others pretended to be hunting. Martha and Eli placed wire around the easiest entrance and posted signs. Private property Vernon Pike visited the next morning. His tone had changed. "I was thinking about your situation." Martha continued repairing the sluice. "You've got children. This kind of work is dangerous. So is cotton. I could take the land off your hands." "For what?" Pike removed a folded paper from his coat. $200. Martha looked at him. $200 was more money than she had seen at one time in years. It could buy food, clothes, and a good milk cow. Pike mistook her silence for temptation. "Cash today. You said the land was worthless." That was before conditions changed. "The land didn't change." Pike's jaw tightened. "I'm making a fair offer." "No, Mr. Pike. You are making a fast offer." She returned to the sluice. The following day, Pike offered $500. A week later, a timber company representative offered $1,200 for mineral rights. Banker Whitmore invited Martha to his office and suggested she sign a management agreement. He explained that a woman with limited business experience could easily be cheated. Martha placed Thomas's tobacco tin on his desk. Inside were the deed, the old map, every sample location, the weight of each nugget, and a handwritten record of every person who had made an offer. "I've been keeping records," she said. Whitmore looked through the pages. The measurements were careful. Dates, depth, gravel descriptions, yield per pan. Thomas had taught her how to observe. Poverty had taught her how to account for every cent. The banker closed the ledger. "What do you intend to do? Work it slowly. You may need investors." "No. Equipment? I'll buy what the land pays for." "You could become wealthy." Martha picked up the tin. "I intend to keep my children fed and my land in my name. Wealth can wait." Over the next year, Martha expanded the operation carefully. She purchased a used gasoline pump for $38. She hired 2 local men at fair wages. She reinforced the sluice and built a gravel screen. Rather than draining the entire wetland, she worked only the exposed section of the ancient creek channel. The deposits were uneven. Some weeks produced almost nothing. Other weeks yielded several ounces. By the spring of 1936, Martha had recovered just over 41 ounces of gold. At the fixed federal price of $35 per ounce, the total value was more than $1,400. That was enough to purchase a small farmhouse, 12 acres of dry ground, and a used Ford truck. But the deeper value of the swamp was not unlimited gold. Martha understood that the deposit was finite. She refused to tear apart the entire property chasing rumors. Instead, she used the income to build stability. She bought the house she had been renting. She paid Eli's school costs. She purchased 2 neighboring acres that provided safer road access. She set aside money for Ruth. She also restored the wetland after each section was worked. That decision confused people almost as much as the original purchase. Timber buyers offered to clear the cypress. Martha refused. A mining promoter from Little Rock proposed bringing in a dragline and excavating the whole parcel. He promised she could be rich within months. Martha asked what would remain when the machines left. "An open pit," he said. "But you'll have money." She sent him away. Thomas's map had helped her find the gold. His respect for the creek helped her understand when to stop. The swamp gave the family money. The wetland itself gave them fish, timber, clean water, and protection from floods. Martha did not mistake treasure for permission to destroy the place that held it. In 1936, Arkansas suffered through one of the harshest summers anyone in Clarendon could remember. Pastures browned, shallow wells failed, cotton curled beneath the heat. Cattle farmers began hauling water in barrels. Vernon Pike's main pond dried to cracked mud. The same men who had called Martha's land useless now noticed something they had ignored. The swamp still held water. Cypress Creek had dropped, but the wetland released water slowly from its shaded channels. Martha owned one of the few reliable sources south of town. Pike arrived with an empty tank wagon. He stood near the gate without his usual confidence. "My cattle need water." Martha looked past him at the wagon. "How many head?" 83. "You can fill the tank at the north channel. Keep the wagon off the soft bank." Pike removed his wallet. "What do you charge?" "Nothing." He stared at her. "You don't owe me kindness." "No," Martha said. The cattle didn't laugh. Pike lowered his eyes. For 6 weeks, Martha allowed nearby families to draw water from the swamp. She established hours so the banks would not be damaged. Eli reinforced the access road. Ruth recorded each wagon. No one was turned away. By the end of August, Parcel 118 had saved hundreds of animals. The gold had made people stop laughing. The water made them understand they had been wrong about something larger. They had called the swamp worthless because it would not grow cotton. They had judged it by the one purpose they understood: But land could hold value in more than one form, sometimes in gravel, sometimes in water, sometimes in the shelter it provided during the worst summer of a generation. The final public reversal came in February 1938. Vernon Pike had borrowed heavily during the better years to purchase machinery and expand his acreage. The drought weakened his operation. Low prices finished it. When the bank scheduled the auction of his equipment, nearly the whole county attended. The same courthouse steps where Martha had paid $12 for parcel 118 now held Pike's plows, wagons, livestock, and furniture. Pike stood beside the building, watching strangers bid on the things he had spent 30 years collecting. Martha attended with Eli. She did not come to celebrate. She came because Pike's wife had quietly told her they needed one milk cow and a wagon if they were going to start. Again on rented ground, when the cow came up for sale, Martha bid. Another buyer raised her. Martha bid again. She purchased the cow for $23. Then she bought Pike's smaller wagon. After the auction, Pike approached her. He looked older than he had 4 years earlier. "Come to see the fool lose his farm," he asked. "No, then why are you here?" Martha handed him the sale receipts. "Your wife said you need these." Pike read the papers. "I can't take them. You can pay me when you're able." He looked toward the courthouse door. "I laughed at you in that room." "I remember. I tried to buy your land after you found gold." "I remember that too. Why help me?" Martha looked across the road toward the creek bottoms. "Because being right does not give me permission to become cruel." Pike's face tightened. For the first time since Martha had known him, the man had no answer. He folded the receipts and placed them in his pocket. Years later, Pike would tell people that losing the farm was not the moment that humbled him. It was receiving mercy from the woman he had humiliated. Stories about Martha Bell's swamp grew with every retelling. Some claimed she found a vein worth $1 million. Others said she unearthed Spanish coins. One version insisted Thomas had buried the gold himself. The truth was quieter. Between 1934 and 1942, Martha's operation recovered approximately 126 ounces of placer gold. At government prices, it was worth a little more than $4,400 over 8 years. That was a meaningful sum during the Depression. But it did not make her one of the richest people in Arkansas. It made her independent. She bought her home. She educated her children. She improved the access road. She purchased additional acreage. She never took a bank loan. Bly eventually studied surveying and returned to Monroe County. Ruth became a schoolteacher. Martha stopped commercial recovery in 1942 after the richest gravel pocket thinned out. She dismantled the sluice. She left the cypress trees standing. She placed the original Nugget inside Thomas's tobacco tin beside the $12 deed. She could have sold it. She never did. To Martha, the Nugget was not merely gold. It was proof of 3 things that Thomas had remembered correctly: that patience could outlast ridicule, and that value did not begin when other people finally recognized it. In the summer of 1958, 24 years after the courthouse auction, Martha returned to parcel 118 with her granddaughter, Anna. Martha was 63. The swamp looked much as it had before the gold discovery. Cypress knees rose from the dark water. Dragonflies moved above the reeds. The old channel had filled gradually with sediment. Only a few pieces of weathered lumber remained from the sluice. Anna had heard the family story many times. She asked the question children always asked. "Grandma, how did you know there was gold there?" Martha took Thomas's map from the tobacco tin. "Your grandfather found the clue, so he knew?" "He suspected, but you found it. We both found it." Anna studied the map. "Weren't you afraid everyone was right?" Martha smiled. "Every day." "Then why did you keep going?" "Because being afraid they are right is not the same as proving they are." She walked to the edge of the old creek channel and pressed her boot into the soft ground. "The town saw mud," she said. "Your grandfather saw an old river. I saw a chance. The gold was down there before any of us had an opinion." Anna looked across the swamp. "Did they ever apologize?" "Some did. What about the ones who didn't?" Martha folded the map. "The truth doesn't need every person to admit it." Martha Bell died in 1971. Her family kept parcel 118. Much of the surrounding wetland was later cleared, drained, or converted to farmland. But Martha's 37 acres remained largely untouched. During flood years, the property absorbed water that would otherwise have moved toward nearby homes. During dry years, wildlife gathered there. The land that had once been called useless continued proving its value long after the last gold pan was washed. The $12 deed and the first Nugget remained in the Bell family. For decades, they were displayed together in a small wooden frame. On the back, Eli wrote one sentence. The price was what the county thought the land was worth. The value was there long before the auction. That may be the real reason people in Clarendon remembered Martha's story. Not because a widow found gold, not because a loud man was proven wrong, and not because $12 became several thousand. They remembered it because everyone has known something, or someone. The world judged too. Quickly, an old machine, a tired field, a quiet worker, a grieving widow, a piece of ground covered in mud. People often call something worthless when they do not understand how to use it, how to read it, or how long it has been waiting. Martha Bell never shouted at the people who laughed. She never demanded that the town confess its mistake. She simply kept digging until the truth became heavy enough to hold in her hand. And on the morning that first gold nugget appeared, the swamp did not suddenly become valuable. The whole town simply became unable to deny what had been there all along. Sometimes the world laughs because it can only see the mud. But patience sees the old river beneath it. Experience sees the hidden layer. Faith keeps digging, and sooner or later, the truth comes to the surface, not always as gold, sometimes as survival, sometimes as dignity, sometimes as the quiet knowledge that the thing everyone dismissed was never worthless at all. What would you have done if you had been standing in that courthouse in 1934? Would you have laughed with the town? Or would you have asked why the widow was willing to spend her last $12 on a swamp nobody wanted? Tell us in the comments. And remember, the next time someone calls an old machine, a tired field, or a quiet person useless, look twice. You may only be seeing the mud,